For daily content, reporting, and much more, follow the pod on Instagram at Bartholomew Town Podcast.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. Today, a very fun episode, a roundtable discussion on the top Rhode Island news stories of 2019 with the Providence Journal's Linda Borg and WPRO News reporter and anchor Paul Zangari. And there's obviously plenty of stories that did not make the conversation, so feel free to email me, Bill, at ripodcast.com, or you can tweet at me at Bill Bartholomew if you have a suggestion. Maybe I'll give a shout out in the upcoming Bartholomew Town Top 19 episodes of 2019. That's coming up in just a few weeks. But for today, a fun roundtable with some of my favorite people in the market, the Z-Man, Paul Zangari, and Linda Borg of the ProJo. All right, a sincere thank you to each of the Bartholomew Town Podcast sponsors in 2019, including Bowen's Wharf, Urban Greens, PDQ Graphics, High Hope, Lagunitas Brewing Company, M. Duran Studios, and Roger Williams Park Zoo. If you'd like to become a sponsor of the Bartholomew Town Podcast, email me, Bill at ripodcast.com. All right, without further ado, let's get right to it. Our roundtable conversation on the top Rhode Island stories of 2019. All right, so we are here. This is going to be fun. We're going to break down some of the top stories of 2019 here in Rhode Island. And what a panel. Doesn't get much better than this. The Providence Journal's Linda Borg and WPRO News, Paul Zangari, the Z-Man. All right, so here we are. Not quite the end of the month. There's, I guess, still a chance something incredible could happen, but most likely here we are. I think the dominant story is going to be education when we look back on this year. Certainly the Johns Hopkins report. Yeah,
S&S, that's right.
I got to add that S there.
Yep.
Will certainly stand out as the dominant story and everything that's come with that. From even just today, Dan McGowan reported that Providence would be in the bottom four of cities in the United States, along with Baltimore, Detroit, and Fresno, California, in terms of education performance. So that stands out right at the top. I guess we should start there. As an education reporter, Linda Borg, we got a big problem here?
I think, it's frustrating to me because I think we've tried a lot of reforms and I still feel we're churning. So in Dan's article today, the commissioner mentions we're going to adopt a brand new math and English curriculum. In the 15 years I've covered education, this is like the fifth brand new math and English curriculum we've adopted. And I'm just wondering, when are we going to stay the course? Like, there's good stuff going on in the Providence schools. Can we just tap that rather than blow it up and start all over? So that's my response to that.
The thing I wonder about is Classical High, which has been doing well since as far back as anybody can remember and still is. And is there anything that's going on there that it's translatable to the other schools?
Well, I think the issue with Classical is it's self-selecting. So the kids who score highest on the test get in. But if you talk to the youth groups who are embedded in Classical, Young Voices, Providence Student Unions, they're pretty unhappy campers. Actually, Classical is very traditional, so they don't do much around hands-on learning. They don't do much around project-based learning. So I don't think that's necessarily the model. The model to me is the big spanky new career and technical academy where kids go in, they learn a trade. There's an auto shop. There's an entire kitchen. There's HVAC. That, to me, in some ways, is more the wave of the future, that model with embedded hands-on learning leading to a certificate in a trade. I'd like to see more of that in Providence. I think Classical is only as good as the kids who test in. I don't think it's a great model for high school education.
It's interesting what, what you're talking about. It's kind of the model is, service industry. And a lot of those skills that you're talking about are the kinds of things that could have been used in manufacturing, of which we have very little now.
Right.
Where does that bring us?
Tough spot to be in.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But these are highly paid jobs in automotive and HVAC, pre-engineering. I mean, they're very much geared it's a great school to tour. You can pull the ceiling down and work on the wires. I mean, it's that kind of hands-on experience.
Sure, and actually, when you think about it, without those kinds of people, everything else, the people who can do the kinds of work that you need to keep the infrastructure working,
right?
You're in trouble without them.
Right.
Right. Another angle on that too is, and interesting, you bring up the students and parent student community involvement in the reform in Providence, but another aspect is with charter schools. I toured some of the Blackstone Valley prep schools, and one of the big things that's cited there is in terms of northern Rhode Island. This is something Lieutenant Governor McKee was talking about several times this year. If you look at Cumberland's numbers, those numbers somehow were able to increase in potentially as a result of the presence of a charter school. Now, I don't know if you can draw that conclusion, but when you talk about models, I'm not sure. I mean, we learned a lot about, I think, charter schools in a negative light this year too, with the Achievement First and Sam Bell coming out with these kind of scathing report. So what's your take on that? How do new models fit in?
So interestingly, last year when I saw Cumberland's test results on the RICAST, they were one of the few districts that actually did well. I called the superintendent, and he told me, and I wish I had the story in front of me, 4 things that Cumberland did that made them better. And a lot of it is what the commissioner's been talking about: intensive professional development, a lot more support for principals, putting their money where their mouth is, in the classroom, not in central office. Now, I know Ed Acorn feels that Blackstone Valley Prep was the one who drove them to be more competitive. But I also think the new superintendent there just dug in and said, all right, we're not going to lose any more kids to the charters, and we're going to change. But I don't think they didn't actually model anything after BVP, which is an excellent school. But they realized, I have competition. We're going to take it up a notch.
So it sounds as if the traditional approach can work as long as it's taken seriously and implemented.
Right.
Right. There was a school, State Street School in Westerly as well. I think they went from like a 1 to a 5
yes.
in their scorecard or something significant like that. So again, if you double down, it's about people,
right?
Getting in a room and huddling and making it happen at a certain level,
right?
So it can be done,
right?
I was just going to say, when you talk about people now, just the fact that there are some new people at the top being from the state, how much of an effect is that going to have when they start getting down into what's been the day-to-day operations in Providence? Are they going to find themselves running into the same things that slowed down the Providence School Committee when they were in charge?
Well, I think you've eliminated a lot of hurdles. So instead of like an order having to go through the city council, the school committee, the mayor's office, all that's going to be compressed. So you'll be able to get money out to schools a lot quicker. And then I think the other big thing is if you give principals the power to run their own show. Now, a lot of principals haven't been trained to do that, but if you decentralize power, Springfield and Lawrence both did that, and principals were able to really say to their teachers, hey, what works here? Forget about central office.
And that kind of brings us to maybe another big story of the year, sort of, home rule, home rule here in Rhode Island, and just the sort of the notion of where the levers of power really sit. Paul, WPRO was all over this all year.
You must be talking about the evergreen, air quotes, bill, legislation.
Indeed, and the firefighters as well, but that's a little bit different. Certainly the evergreen stands out as a point of contention, and I guess the average Rhode Islander probably doesn't realize it when they think about it. They're probably more familiar with the latest car accident than this. But nonetheless, this impacts the dynamics of the state going forward.
I was just thinking, for anyone who's listening who isn't really sure what we're talking about, because this is the season when people are putting evergreens in their houses, what we're talking about is the continuation in force of a contract that has expired until a new one has been reached between a community and the workers for that community. And that evergreen, it keeps on. The leaves stay all through. And the communities are arguing this means our hands are tied. We're stuck with an old contract. Conditions could have changed. And if they do, and maybe the community is shorthanded, it needs to get some help from its employees and work collaboratively. Maybe we'll give you back something in the way of hours, but less money, something along those lines. But nope, got to keep it the way it was until we come up with something else.
How does this impact things on the education side with teachers?
Well, I see both sides, and I have to be very careful because I'm not really supposed to have an opinion on this. But
that's a problem, I know.
I think, I'll use Providence as an example. So they went well over 360 days without a contract. Things were just at a logjam. And if you remember, about a year ago, the teachers were protesting. They shut down the mayor's State of the State with the yelling, and the mayor was really getting testy as well. So I think you also have to recognize when there's a protracted labor dispute, if a city can unilaterally go in there and change things, that's not fair to the union. So I think there has to be a middle ground. I think if a conflict is going on over, say, 3-4 months, there has to be some third way where the municipality can maybe get some temporary concessions, but it doesn't completely strip all the rights in the current collective bargaining. I don't have an answer. I think there's something better than the evergreen, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, the common ground is never discussed on this
Right.
issue either. It always does seem to come down to one side or the other.
Right.
And, okay, well, is this lawsuit even, is there any precedent for it to proceed? And,
Right.
and so on and so forth. So the lawsuit being the challenge by the League of Cities and Towns to this legislation. So,
It's interesting, though, when you talk about one side having an opinion, the other side having a different opinion, and it seems as if one side will talk its argument louder and louder, and the other side won't address what was just said, but will just argue something entirely different. We're seeing it in so many stories. I mean, when it comes right down to what's going on in Washington right now, you'll have, for example, Democrats saying, we see that the president has done what we say he's done in Ukraine, what these witnesses tell us has been done. That represents an existential threat to our democracy. And then you'll see people who are supporting the president saying he just has a different opinion on how our dealings should be with Ukraine, not addressing, again, neither one's saying, addressing what the other side's talked about. And we saw the same sort of thing with the Paw Sox. Yeah. When people were talking about the funding for the stadium and what was actually going to be supporting it. And the other side always saying, 38 studios, and never actually talking about the same thing at the same time.
fascinating stuff. Put it out to you. What are some of the other big stories that come to mind here in Rhode Island from your
perspective?
perspective?
I think the big one that hasn't gotten enough attention and it has such national ramifications is the suit involving a constitutional right to an education.
Sure.
I mean, this is something like 30 other states, and I have a call into a national group to confirm that, have this right. And I contacted the governor's office yesterday, and I was referred to the AG's office, which is her representative. I've today called almost every member on the K-12 board because one of the young kids from the Providence Student Union said at the press conference last week, why is it that the Rhode Island Department of Ed does not support our right to a constitutional right to an education? And I thought, that's a good story. We haven't really asked RIDE why. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. Now, the General Assembly, I understand, will balk because it's giving up their power to determine educational funding. Mm-hmm. But barring that argument, let's put it out there. Why wouldn't RIDE support a constitutional right? I haven't gotten that answer yet. So.
And the student suit saying that we deserve a civics education.
Right.
And I mean, Bill, you've been answering the phones at WPRO for a while. How many times does somebody call in and tell you that whatever officer it is, shouldn't he or she just unilaterally go and do it because they got elected? Oh, checks and balances? What are those?
Right.
Seems like it's completely forgotten. So maybe it hasn't been taught for a while.
No question about it. I remember when I graduated from high school in 2002, almost 20 years ago, but I remember, which is shocking, but I remember a big problem there was not education on geography. And literally kids who were going off to big-time schools and celebrated as, check out, this girl here, she's everything you want to be. If they didn't know where, had no idea where, I don't know.
Well, Czechoslovakia.
Right.
Where it used to be.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, and what's Serbia now?
Right. Basic stuff in a way to understanding the world. Paul, one of the stories, this is sort of an annoying story, but the Donald Gardner story. Richard Gardner. Richard Gardner story. What does that say about Rhode Island's, the community? Is it over the top, I guess, to go after this guy for getting out of jail and moving into a new place? Or does it sort of show a strength of Rhode Islanders from your perspective that they rally against this sort of
I'm wrestling with that one right now because he's just moved into the town where I've lived since 1951.
Lincoln.
Yeah. And so people I know are getting up in arms about it. Yeah. And I'm going, gee, can I even cover this story?
Right.
With so many people I know who have very strong opinions on it.
Yep.
But as you can see, I really haven't gotten that one straight in my mind.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to see how the fact that laws have changed since he was convicted and sentenced, notifying the community. I don't really know how some of my neighbors found out that he was coming to our town, but they did.
I thought he was in Cranston.
Briefly.
He's moved again?
About to, I guess, if not
Oh, my
already
gosh,
there.
all
But I noticed actually a friend who is a friend posted something on Facebook with a picture of a house or an address. I Googled the house, and sure enough, just been sold, and
Wow.
here it is.
So I'm going to post sort of a contrary. So I had to write the story a couple of weeks ago when he moved to Cranston. And when we got the police report, which I've never seen in a police report, the header on the police report was this guy's address in caps. So I thought, no criticism of the police per se, but I thought, is this a thinly veiled attempt to get so much brouhaha that this guy's pushed out of yet another community? And let's face it, he's got to live somewhere, right? I'm not saying I'd be thrilled if he was across the street from me, but also he has rights. And
I know.
in the sort of rush to judgment, no one's realizing he has served his time. So I know I'll probably get 5,000 Twitter things.
Yeah,
on
look
that.
out, here it comes.
Yeah, here it comes. But I do think that
You
he has
are
rights. Yeah.
legally correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, this is, for listeners who may not be familiar, this is a man who was convicted of kidnapping and raping kids in the 80s, served something like 30 years in jail.
Mass and Rhode Island.
In Mass and Rhode Island. Yeah, he served in Mass, I think. And
Mostly, yeah.
now he's back here in the state for a good portion this year, first in, maybe that's the police coming from right now, up to Lincoln. But recently, anyway, the state police opened an investigation into some forensic investigations into his cell phone. So who knows what's going on with that guy. But I thought it was an interesting thing, the response around a singular figure, polarizing and certainly emotional, reaction would come from thinking about a person like that. But I don't know.
I know, before we get too far away from education that we were talking about, I just wanted to toss in the I guess you could call it the brouhaha between Central Falls and Burrowville.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Where is this racist when we wave American flags?
Well, I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I did talk to a couple of the parents who were there accompanying their kids, and they felt, now granted the video was tough to discern, but their feelings as women of color from Central Falls was that the shouts and the activity were clearly meant to be intimidating. A group of young men go up to the girls' bus, sort of circle it and yell, "Go home," or "Go home to Central Falls," depending on how you hear the tape.
Right.
So, I think this isn't the first incident that has occurred in Burrowville. I think, maybe it needs to take a look at what's going on in terms of cultural sensitivity in the schools.
Yeah, can't rule that out. It's funny talking about Central Falls, having just talked about Lincoln, and another story that's been big in the news. Just a few years ago, when my kid was playing Little League ball, we used to go to Central Falls to play the games, whether they were home games or not, because CF couldn't really afford the transportation, and we were close enough. And we were right across the street from another place that's been in the news a lot.
Ah, yes.
The Wyatt.
Yep, that park. And that I started asking questions as mostly a soccer referee, but also playing soccer when I was growing up. We would play games there, and I go, wow, what is this place, the Wyatt? Who runs this? This isn't the ACI. Who are these people? Why is it here? And why am I going to Charo High School playing on this field with a scoreboard and stands, and you got someone selling hot chocolate and taking 15 ADs driving around in golf carts, and my opponent's playing on a field of dirt across from a private prison. So I've been, sports has laid a very interesting window into inequality in the state for sure.
And it's just coincidentally, as we're recording this, later today, there's expected to be a demonstration outside of the Wyatt Detention Center, which it always bothers me to have known Donald Wyatt and known what a nice guy he was to see everything going on in the place named after him. Is some people planning to get arrested to make known their opposition to the private prison.
Yeah, that's
or jail,
no doubt.
I guess, is the technical term. Prison's a different definition.
And that's no doubt one of the major stories of the year as well. The situation with Thomas Woodworth, the former captain at the Wyatt Detention Center, during similar action to what we might see this afternoon. Kids were sitting, blocking in the entrance to the employee and visitor lot in Woodworth. He didn't drive his truck like in Charlottesville. It wasn't that, but he definitely moved his truck into them. And then after a grand jury review, no charges were brought forth. So that certainly exposed a lot of push and pull within the system, I think. And I'm not sure, just an opinion, I'm not sure Attorney General Nerona got the result that he wanted, because it's going to be politically difficult for him to win over a lot of the left, I think, going forward. But your take on that story.
And we're talking about civics just a little bit earlier. You realize it was up to the grand jury to charge, and not the attorney general.
Right.
And
so
he did not seem happy when the grand jury didn't give him something to prosecute.
Yeah, that's the body language / being there at the press conference. And
I wasn't
watching
there, so that's interesting, huh?
Yeah, I wasn't either, but I've talked with people who have been, and actually I talked to him on the phone, and he was not a happy camper that day.
Yeah, right. And I think you're right. A lot of people don't understand. I saw some stuff on Twitter. Peter Nerona, you resign and things like this, and you're thinking, wow, this guy ran unopposed, other than Alan Gordon, the Compassion Party or whatever it is, for basically had unanimous support, is someone who's praised equally on talk radio by John DePietro and Ian Donis.
Right.
So it's hard to imagine how he could be inserted into this. Nonetheless, he's become a part of the face of that result, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
It's kind of a no-win thing for him.
Right. That's true.
I think the other big thing, and I'm not as well versed on this would be more of a Kathy Gregg, Patrick Anderson thing, but the whole emergence of this progressive women's caucus at the State House.
And within the Democrat Party,
If you saw that video of Steve Alves, I forget what he said to...
pigs or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean... Here, this is sort of a moment of crisis, I think, in the General Assembly. And these women have a right to be heard. And, I think that story is going to really be an interesting one to follow.
I'm thinking just in terms of progressive by itself, not saying women or men.
Right.
The Democrats that are kind of the old line Democrats, I think the ones you're referring to, are the closest thing to a Republican Party in Rhode Island.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that sort of identification, how that shifts, if there ever is a point where there's we see the emergence of the Rhode Island Political Co-op. They have a press conference at 2 o'clock today at the State House as well, I guess, announcing more candidates. Now, I keep asking them, can you win statewide in not just the South Kingstown School Board, but can you send people? If that happens, then you may see all of a sudden people who are those institutionalist Democrats, they may say, you know what, maybe it's time to put the R and band up with the Mike Chippendale, Brian Newberry, Blake Philippi's of the world, Susie Yankees of the state, rather than join up with the Moira Walshes of the state. We'll see.
Interesting.
Probably 10 years minimum, though.
Yeah.
All right, we're kind of in wrap. We got about 5 minutes left. Any topics that you'd like to touch? Or
I can't help thinking that when you look at news stories, some of them seem to be chronic, some of them seem to be what's the word? Intensive, whatever. I can't think of the
of the moment.
Yeah, right. I'm trying to put it in medical terms. There's chronic and then there's acute. That's what it is.
Right.
One of the situations, and actually now I'm going to violate what I was talking about, but all right, we'll give you an acute one at the beginning of the year and regulations that it may lead to. We had that situation in Newport and Middletown, where suddenly, without gas, coldest week of the year, and people were freezing and displaced. And I know that the lieutenant governor was talking about legislation to help hold a utilities' feet to the fire. Probably a poor choice of words in this case on account of that, and the effects that could have going forward. But that was really an acute story, and one that I'm sure anybody who lives on that part of the island, is never going to forget.
Oh, and there are businesses that lost their business that have not recovered. A lot of money has not been accounted for, and where it's going to come from. A lot of finger pointing on that story to this day still.
Yeah. Another one that I wanted to talk about is what's been happening in Providence at closing time with the people who've been killed, and the city trying to take steps to control that. Maybe not having nightclubs with a 2 a.m. closing and serving liquor in neighborhoods, just for one thing. But it also brings up the fact that there are some people there. It doesn't matter where the nightclub is. Certain people are going to get into trouble.
Right.
And how does the city address that?
On your end, any other?
I guess for me, looking forward, we've been waiting anxiously. I've pretty much canceled every vacation up until next week, waiting for the shoe to drop on the new superintendent in Providence.
Yep.
And I think something has to happen soon because I'm hearing a lot of disgruntlement on the ground in Providence, a lot of fear and concern about the teacher's contract, principals not knowing, am I going to have a job? I'm not protected. Fran Gallo is supposedly limited to 90 days, and
Right.
God bless her. I think she's probably giving up her pension at this point because she's been in there more than 90 days. So I think we really need to resolve these questions quickly before people lose that moment of confidence and change. I think the commissioner came in with tremendous goodwill, and I'm just hoping people stick with it because as Rhode Islanders, we tend to eat our own. So
Yeah.
that would be my concern.
Also, IGT, Twin River.
Yeah.
There's I guess that one's chronic at this stage of the game. That's a story that we're going to see continuing on into the next year.
Absolutely. And hopefully those commercials with the Twin River ain't going to tell you this and ain't going to tell you that. Those on WPRO,
That's another
that'll
example
be gone.
of what we were talking about earlier, where one side just talks past the other,
Yep.
and they never seem to agree on what it is they're discussing. You don't
Right.
have to agree on an answer necessarily, but at least talk about the same topic and see if you can get a meeting of the minds.
Absolutely. Yeah. John Taylor out today at Twin River and mobile sports betting in this year as a musician. Maybe, right? Now we got this lawsuit moving forward, the Brandon Bell, Joe Larissa peer group. I mean, what are those guys high-fiving as this stuff goes through? It does seem silly and more of like a payback for Reproductive Health Care Act or whatever it may be.
Oh, yeah, that was
but-
a big one earlier this year, too.
Yep. Oh, yeah. That's kind of factors into that progressive flank. The Reform Caucus is there. Pressure, political pressure, some media pressure, people turning out, people screaming, people invading, occupying, et cetera. And all of a sudden it gets through. Does that impact Speaker Mattiello and amongst his other woes that he's felt this year? I wonder what District 15 looks like going forward.
I would say that when you mentioned Speaker Mattiello, the fact that he was in Pawtucket to celebrate something that has to do with sports just a short time ago is something people might not have envisioned just a few months ago.
Right.
When the Paw Sox deal went down. And as Mark Patinkin addressed, a lot of the finger pointing was right at him.
Right. The day that the Woo Sox announcement occurred, I remarked, I actually listened to Clampkin was covering, and I drove out to the western hills of Cranston, actually stopped at the Whole Foods, and I just parked myself there and blasted it, opened my windows and cranked it and just listened to that. And I was like, just take it in because this is where that came from. Everybody knows it, at this point.
It'll be interesting to see when you talk about the new development in Pawtucket, if that'll be the kind of thing that might make Hasbro think all of a sudden, maybe this is a cool community where our young, creative people would feel at home.
Right. Can they get the Apex property developed there? Something like that. So, yeah, that's obviously the last thing I have in my notes is that the major economic development, $400 million going into Pawtucket.
Let's all become soccer fans.
Let's do it, Hey, I used to referee in that league
That's
in the
right.
USL.
Yep.
And back in the day, they had a team in Rhode Island here, and I can't remember there ever being more than 200 people there. But now I'm told that the league is huge. Tom Quinlan over at WPRO is always talking about how great it is. So it seems like there's people who want this.
Can you imagine what a letdown AA ball would have been in Pawtucket after AAA?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Red Sox team.
Right. I think it helps too with soccer is never going to be the top of you're never going to get world-class soccer here, so it'll always be in the United States, that is. So it's always sort of just our own example. It's like European basketball or something like that.
I'm thinking a
So,
7,500-seat stadium is probably realistic.
Yes.
It's not huge. It's not the kind of thing where anytime you see, say, pictures on the 6 o'clock news sportscasting, a stadium that's largely empty.
Right.
There'll be people in those stands.
Right. Plus, you could play lacrosse there. You could probably do
Concerts,
concerts,
yeah.
as well. All right. What a panel. That went by amazingly fast. That
Really
was so much
fast.
fun.
Yeah.
Two of my favorite people in Rhode Island media, no doubt about
thank
it.
you.
Linda Borg, Providence Journal, the Z-Man, Paul Zangari, WPRO News. Happy New Year.
Happy
You too.
New Year.
All right, thanks, Bill.
Awesome.
It's always a sincere pleasure to spend some time together here on the pod. Look out on Tuesday for the Bartholomew Town Holiday Special featuring Governor Raimondo, Lieutenant Governor McKee, Chef Frank Terranova, Ben DeCastro, Scott McKay, Michelle Cruz, and a whole bunch more. Until then, I'm Bill Bartholomew. We'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.